What actually makes a computer an AI PC, especially once you strip away the marketing and all the buzzwords? Well, I've got an answer for you. Well, I haven't. My guest does. His name's Logan Lawler. He's from Dell Technologies, and he leads AI strategy for the Dell Pro Precision Workstation portfolio. But today, we're not going to be talking about selling things. We're going to unpack what matters when choosing hardware for local AI. And that means we will demystify everything from CPUs, GPUs to NPUs. And why so many people are feeling confused right now about that AI PC conversation. But we will be your guide and show you how teams are deciding when they run AI locally in the data center or in the cloud, what drives those different decisions. And if you've been trying to make sense of AI hardware without overspending or underspecking, today's conversation will hopefully help you cut through the noise of exactly what makes an AI PC useful in the real world. But you don't want to hear me rambling on setting the scene, so buckle up and hold on tight as I beam your ears all the way to Austin, Texas, where my guest is waiting to demystify all this and much more. So thank you for joining me on the podcast today, Logan. Can you tell everyone listening a little about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, sure, Neil. Appreciate you having me on. So Logan Lawler, have been at Dell for longer than I probably care to admit. It's coming up on about 20 years. And I've done a lot of different things at Dell, but most currently, the job that I'm in and why I'm kind of on the podcast today is I lead AI strategy for our Dell Pro Precision line of workstations within Dell.
And there's so much I want to talk with you about today because I'm fortunate I get to go to the US a lot for so many different tech conferences. And right now, it seems that every single one of them seems to be pushing AI PCs. And yet I know I do see many users on Reddit that feel somewhat indifferent to that. And I suspect it comes down to a missing education piece. So to begin with today and set the scene, let's start there and make sure nobody gets left behind. So from your perspective at Dell Technologies, what actually makes a computer an AI PC beyond the marketing? Which specs truly matter? Is it CPUs, GPUs, memory, NPUs? So many acronyms. Tech loves a good acronym, but let's start from there. What makes a good AI PC?
So you asked the most complicated question. You basically asked, what is the reason for life in the very first question. So let me kind of break it down this way. And it's not going to be a long-winded answer, but just for those that aren't super technical, a couple of terms you said. So you have CPU, which is, think your Intel kind of, central processing unit, which been around for forever. You have your GPU, graphical processing unit, think like graphics card, like NVIDIA RTX Pro, Blackwell GPU. And NPUs are something that are newer on the market as of maybe let's call it 2 years ago. And it's a neural processing unit. So it kind of shares, some dedicated RAM of the system to do offload AI tasks. So AI PCs as a category it's kind of, I'm not going to say it's kludgy, but it's one of those, if you've ever taken the LSAT or done like kind of a word, one of those kind of like word riddle type things, the way you need to think about it is that all AI workstations are AI PCs, but not all AI PCs are AI workstations. And what I mean by that is that anything with a, NPU or a GPU is considered an AI PC. I mean, is considered an AI PC. Where an AI workstation, that's kind of where my expertise lies. Obviously, I know a lot about NPUs as well. But where GPUs separate in a workstation is NPUs are very low power, very little not little that they can do, but it's growing in the amount they can do, where GPUs really, when it comes to AI, is, ultimately the gold standard. So, for example, I think a lot of confusion in the market, and I completely understand why Reddit, has maybe that sentiment, because they're technically, usually a much more technical audience, is that AI PC, oh my God, it's going to do all these great things. But the key is, and this is what I want everyone to take away, if you take away one thing from this, is that NPUs, are not GPUs, and they have underlying softwares and SDKs that power them, right? Like in NVIDIA is obviously CUDA, NPU is kind of the Intel architecture on the Intel side, or it could be AMD or whoever. But if your software or what the workflow you're doing is not accelerated by those SDKs, whether that's, the GPU or the NPU, then getting an AI PC does absolutely nothing for you. So no matter which way you go, workstation, AI PC, you need to think about what software am I using, do some research, or what I tell you to do is open up your task manager on your computer, run that program, and see what's actually being utilized. Is it the NPU? Is it the GPU? Is it the CPU? Is it the RAM? Trying to understand where their code base is written, because if you do that, it'll tell you what you need. And most of it is GPU, but there are growing pieces of software like Microsoft Copilot, right, that can leverage the NPU. So long-winded answer, it's extremely confusing, but the takeaway is know what softwares you're using, understand which acceleration path, GPU, NPU, CPU that you need, then you can't go wrong.
And it's so important that you mention that. I think very often people think of a one size fits all. They'll speak to someone in the office and they'll say, well, you'll need this, when actually they don't, because it's just a browsing machine. And we might have many people listening, developers, researchers, or even just curious professionals choosing hardware for a local AI. And you must see so many bad things on the internet, whether it be Reddit or a LinkedIn news feed. What are the most common misconceptions or myths that you see that might frustrate you? And also the people that you speak with, where do they often overspend or underspec because the basics are not that well understood? Let's clear some of these things up.
Yeah, for sure. Let's think about this. Some of the misconceptions, right, is I think a lot of, and I kind of answered in the previous question, a lot of the misconception is, let's say, and I'll target this as just a general, consumer, not a developer, not someone who's super technical. They think they're getting an AI PC with an NPU and it's going to change their life. And in about several years, when we have software that is written to, leverage that, piece of silicone for an acceleration standpoint, that absolutely it will change your life. I think that's kind of one kind of misconception. Two is that depending on what you're doing, and this is kind of an NVIDIA thing, if you'll see a lot, especially on Reddit, people think, oh yeah, I have a gaming card, right? Yeah. And those absolutely work for a lot of AI stuff. And if you're tinkering around and you're not, doing this professionally, or, it's just like, hey, I'm at home, I have a gaming PC and I want to use comfy UI, like, awesome, have fun. But if you're using this, and now this is more targeted at the professionals, is that a lot of people, because of, and not necessarily cost, but they don't understand the difference between GeForce cards on the NVIDIA side, like 5090s, 5080s, 4090s versus the RTX Pro cards. And the difference is the amount of VRAM that you get, right? The amount of power, the amount of supportability, et cetera. And then also what that card can actually be used for. So, the way that I would kind of say is that when you're thinking about, graphics acceleration for AI, hey, at home, use your GeForce, you've already got it, test it out. But if you're moving into a professional environment, you definitely need to be, on a workstation class system like our Dell Pro Precision machines, and also have, NVIDIA RTX Pro Blackwell cards.
I'm glad you mentioned them, because I know you spend a lot of time working with NVIDIA RTX Pro GPUs inside Dell Precision and those Pro Max systems. So again, for those people listening, how do these GPUs change what teams can realistically run locally, from model development to inference, comparing with, let's say, relying entirely on the cloud that many people listening will be doing?
Yeah. So let's talk about the cloud for a second. The cloud, and I'm not here to, I think the cloud has its right place, right, in the right thing. But let me give you a hypothetical. Is that, hey, you are tinkering in the cloud and you are like, wow, this is fun. I am running these models, etc. Tinkering in the cloud, or like non-professional use, or like, revenue that is assigned to kind of that cloud usage where you're getting something out that a customer's billing against, kind of as cost of goods sold thing, makes the cloud very expensive. What NVIDIA did from their Ada generation to Blackwell generation GPUs that made complete, I call it game changing, others might not, is the amount of VRAM that you need. VRAM at the end of the day is, it's what makes the juice run, right? Like, it's what you load your model into, so, the tensor cores can work, running inference, fine tuning, etc. Well, gen over gen, NVIDIA from Ada to Blackwell doubled the amount of VRAM. So taking it from in the highest card, 48 to 96 gigs. So if you know anything about, cloud, or what servers you're using, or, you have access to a data center, 96 gig rivals server level cards, right? That are in a server farm, multiple stacks and racks. So basically NVIDIA made it where you could put a small server more or less on your desk. And it has changed the game because at the end of the day, you can have two older generation GPUs that have 30 gigs, but you can't stitch those together, right? You want to be able to run, that in one parallel process versus having running three different things, right? And not every application is set up to take advantage of multiple GPUs. But by integrating that into one, I think that really changed the game. And yes, I'm not going to lie, those cards aren't cheap. But for example, I have a company I work with. I won't say their name, but they were developing this application that's awesome. And the developer, very talented, very creative, went to the cloud, for simplicity and all of that because it was easy to scale and all this. And it got to the point where they were getting some paying customers, but he's kind of a tinker, right? He wanted to develop his application, make things better, run experiments, kind of run a sandbox. Well, he did that. And then when he got his bill, he was like, oh my God, I can never do that again because the bill costs more than buying just the card, right? So that's the thing that you need to think about, like, whether you think locally or cloud is think holistically, like, what is my cost? Like, am I trying to do this as like a CapEx expense, an OpEx expense? How many people are going to be accessing this? Like, how do I want to deploy? All those things need to be considered. But I will say local AI with, like an RTX Pro GPU with 96 gigs will rival what most developers or data scientists could ever possibly utilize in a data center, and it can sit on top of your desk.
And throughout both of our careers, we've seen so many reoccurring trends. Everything seems to come full circle, from data centers going to the cloud and then back again. And then now with our local AI, there's this clear shift towards doing compute closer to where the data lives. But from what you're seeing here, what is ultimately driving that move, and how are organizations balancing performance, cost, and data control as they slowly begin to rethink where AI workloads should run? I think we've been debating this for 3 years now, but what are you seeing here?
I think the debate continues. I think the debate continues. I really think it comes down to, the size and scale of organizations. But I'll kind of break it down into, because I work with, smaller kind of startups. I work with like medium-sized businesses all the way up to some of the Fortune 500 companies, right? I mean, Fortune 500 companies at the end of the day, I think are making the change purely because security, and they're starting to get more into AI. I'm not saying they're using cloud, but it is more likely that they're moving to the data center or local compute, kind of at the desk side, right? Medium business at the end of the day is really kind of a function of, it's a bit cost, but it's also, it's really kind of, I think medium business is more kind of like cost is like, what makes sense for me? What makes sense for me? But small businesses are really is like, what can I get up and running as quickly as possible, right? Like, what can I make happen quickly that's not going to break the bank? And that's what I want to say is that before, and there's the big thing that I've seen is that whether it be, latency or moving from the cloud back to the desk side, whether it's latency or cost or security or a whole host of things, whatever your reason is, those decisions are now being made after the initial decision was made. And what I would challenge people to do is that people that are in charge, if you're in charge of making these decisions or thinking about these decisions, so I see a lot of companies rush to, well, man, let's just do this. And then it's like, hey, to unwind everything, it takes forever. So I would say before making a decision, really spend that extra time thinking about like, hey, where is this going to grow in my organization? Like, how am I going to deploy AI kind of across maybe a huge company? Think about those, how many developers do I have? Start thinking about those things first, and then take some time, make one decision versus pulling back on the decision. And the other thing I've seen, and you got me thinking now, is it's hybrid. I've also seen start a lot more of hybrid type solutions where, for example, hey, the development piece and the sandboxing is local, but then for deployment, because, maybe it's software as a service or something, or some kind of AI app, it's delivered, it's scalable, it's predictable, customers are paying, it might be in the cloud, right? So it really depends, but I'm starting to see more hybrid workflows, not necessarily a complete jump back to, oh my God, we can't be in the cloud anymore. It's moving more hybrid, I think.
And I think you've got somewhat of a unique vantage point here because you're someone that's got visibility into how teams are actually using GPU powered workstations, hybrid cloud, storage rich environments every single day. So just to bring to life some of the things that you're seeing here, you don't have to mention any names, but are you able to share any examples of how these setups are supporting AI workflows in practice in real environments rather than just in lab conditions?
Yeah, for example, I can't name any names, of
Yeah.
course, but I'll give you kind of a perfect example. Are you saying like kind of the actual workflow
Yeah.
itself?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
sure. No problem. So there is a company that we work with that I would say it's kind of like a small to kind of medium, right? And it kind of follows the same. They have a whole host of data scientists. They have a whole host of kind of software devs, right? All of their compute is local. So that's on kind of the Dell Pro Max with GB10s. They're doing the work. It's doing the work on, some Dell Pro Precision, desk side workstations. But where they make basically they're doing, think of all the sandboxing, code writing, compiling, all the machine learning tasks, all the deep learning tasks, basically compiling, testing, sandboxing, all of that is done locally, right? And the choice was made is because the CEO was like, hey, we want to build the best dang thing that we possibly can, right? And I won't tell you who it is, but it's an AI agent builder app that I think is one of the best. And they're like, we want to build the best dang thing, and time and things are going to change rapidly, and we don't want to be stuck in the cloud. So they made the decision to invest in hardware for all of their research. It's not a huge company; it's about 25, but local resources for that. But they have quite a few paying customers, and they move basically that up to the data, or they move that up to the cloud for deployment. So they're moving, they act because it's right. The customer pays a fixed cost. All that can be figured out. You can figure out how many times they access it, and all this kind of API calls and all this stuff. They can basically do the math and say, hey, I can price my software based upon this. So this makes sense for me because I'm not being charged and I don't have this huge server that I have to take care of if no one buys my application. So, that's kind of a real world example of what they do. And then, they have the connecting fabric, across NVIDIA's kind of AI enterprise, which makes it really, really easy for everyone to kind of work collaboratively on, their software solutions and stuff like that. So that's one example that I've seen from a pretty well-known company. I wish I could say the name, but I can't.
Intrigued, incredibly cool. And as AI workflows inevitably become more distributed across edge, on-prem, and indeed cloud, for people listening here, those business leaders and IT teams, what are those new challenges that will inevitably be created for IT leaders that are still trying to keep systems usable for developers without making them fragile or overly complex and be the guardian of the network at the same time?
Yeah, we're seeing that, more and more, right? Because
Yeah,
it's not just the developer that wants access to it, right? It's that person in marketing who, wants to create some AI images, right?
yeah,
There's so many more. I think that's the complexity piece that, if you're in kind of, you're like an ITDM role or you're an IT leader, is you have to think it's like AI is not it's not certain people's role. It's becoming everyone's role. It's not necessarily that they're AI developers, but even your marketing folks, your procurement folks, everyone is running some sort of now, generally, some sort of AI inference, on their system, right? And you might not even be knowing that you're doing it, depending on the application that you're doing. And that's good AI when you don't even know that it's happening. But what they need to think about is, I think for IT leaders to make it easy is think about, hey, if I know, if I have Jimmy, or Patty, and they're in marketing, start thinking about, to make it simple, is like, hey, like what am I going to get them? They're new to the company. What am I going to get them that if AI is really accelerated that much in the last 2 years, what is that going to look like in 3 years? Like, I don't want to buy a system that is completely out to date. So really what they can do is kind of try to future proof themselves as much as possible, to make sure it can handle kind of today's workloads and the workloads of the future. That is probably the easiest thing I think to do, because otherwise, if you're not giving any sort of NPU, GPU compute to someone locally on their system that they're using as like their daily driver, they're going to come to the data center or they're going to ask for the cloud. And that's where resources, because would you rather buy, a massive, data center, have a huge cloud bill, or spend a couple $1,000s for a GPU and a system that you're already going to buy?
And before you joined me on the podcast today, I was doing a little research on you, trying to find out a little bit more. I didn't go the old school method of Googling and getting loads of sponsored results, etc. I asked ChatGPT, and straight
You did
away,
not. You did not.
I did.
Did you really? Okay.
And guess what? He told me you're a podcaster too. You
I
host the
am.
Reshaping Workflows podcast, right?
Yeah, that's true. I do. I mean, I've done a podcast in a previous life. I've been a lifelong cigar smoker, so had one back in the day that was very popular. We won't talk about that. But yeah, about a year ago, and I've been told not to brag, but I have a good podcast voice. I don't know if that's true or not. I can't even I can't stand the sound of my own voice, so I never go back and listen to my own episodes. But yes, I am. So the idea of reshaping workflows, every company kind of has a podcast, and I wanted to do this one differently, where it wasn't just, a shill of, our Dell Technology products and our Dell Pro Precision workstations or, NVIDIA RTX Pro Blackwell GPUs, where it was the industry leaders, it was actual practitioners across all the major verticals that workstation serves, right? From engineering to AI to manufacturing to energy, healthcare, life sciences, kind of the whole thing, to have them come on, talk about their workflows, talk about what they're doing to kind of inspire people, but also to talk about how does workstation and local compute, power their workflow. So in a year, it's been kind of a wild journey, in the amount that the podcast has grown, how much I'm recording. I don't know when this one is actually releasing, but, in early February, I'm going to be recording in 1 week. I think it's 18 episodes, just to get it knocked out because I just have to schedule it in blocks. But yeah, no, I love it. And I love bringing people on and learning. And I think it's one of the ways that I learn as well, being able to kind of talk to people. But yeah, it's pretty cool. It's a pretty cool feeling when, you're at a Dell event or an industry event and you talk, on stage or whatever, and someone comes up and goes, I thought I knew your voice, but I didn't know where. And then they're like, you're that guy. I'm like, yeah, I'm that guy.
It's so refreshing to hear Dell approach it this way, because I think almost any corporate podcast, nobody wants to listen to you.
No.
You might like running, but you're not going to want to listen to a Nike podcast talking about running shoes, for example. You're not going to want to do that. And the similar with Dell, if it's just about selling particular equipment, there's no value in there. And what I found refreshing about what you're doing there is these conversations with real builders, real practitioners that listeners can learn from. And I'm curious, if you were to put all these episodes into a big melting pot, are there any patterns that have surprised you most about how people are really adopting AI hardware and software together? Maybe even hear a few stories of things, I never thought about it that way. And what kind of stories come out of that?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I'll tell you, I don't know. I mean, you know what? I am going to do that because I do have a couple AI workflows that I created where I can very easily strip the audio out and then I can put it in a RAG database. So I will do that. Just out of morbid curiosity. I think one of the craziest things that we've ever discussed on the podcast was basically is AI taking away our cognitive ability to think.
Yeah.
And you can go listen. It was with the episode I recently did with the neuron, but basically the idea was that I'll age myself here. I'm 42. I'm an elder millennial. I'm losing my eyesight. It's terrible. But I can't read up close anymore. But when I was a kid, when I wanted to research something, I had to ask, or I had to think about it, or I had to go find an encyclopedia. But I also had the age of the internet where I could learn things and watch documentaries and all of that. And my daughter's generation, she's 11, it's not that. It's there's no thought. And we had it. And that was the thing I think that was not most shocking, but kind of most eye-opening to me is that my daughter will literally, because I want to expose her to all the AI stuff, right? Is when she has a question, it's not all right, she has a problem. I said, hey, normally, if it was just her and I talking, I like to approach her hey, what would you think? What do you think? What do you think? How would you approach this? What she does is just goes, hey, ChatGPT OSS, can you tell me how I should do this? And I just think that is fundamentally very scary and fundamentally probably the biggest issue with AI. And it's not one that we'll see today, but we might see 20, 30 years from now, which to me is, are we going to take away our ability to cognitively think?
Yeah, it's such a big problem. I consider it's almost like the AI paradox, isn't it? Because to
Yeah,
survive in an AI world, you need critical thinking to stand out from the crowd more than ever. But of course, overusage of AI removes that critical thinking. It's a real paradox.
it is. What I would say is that it can be easily, there can be rules. I mean, there can be rules, but not, I hate regulations, but like there can be things and tools where it's like, hey, here's an age safe thing where it's very simple, right? Like, hey, like for the AI, if you ask a question, say, hey, what should I do? Be like, hey, what do you think you should do? And
Yeah,
if it goes back, say, hey, here's maybe two different paths. Tell me why you think one is better. Like, do you know what I'm saying? Like that
yeah.
would be something very simple to add. I think would ward off a lot of potential problems, in my humble opinion.
100% with you. And if we were to look ahead, looking at AI PCs as they continue to evolve, for them to become genuinely useful rather than another buzzword, what do you think vendors, employers, and educators need to be doing differently to help those everyday users, those people listening, understand and trust the technology that they're being asked to adopt?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. I don't. It's going to be the answer to your question, but it's probably not the answer you're looking for.
Yeah.
Is that I think fundamentally the technology, is being adopted. I think people do find it generally useful. Useful. The thing is that really from I'm gonna go an NPU standpoint because that's where most people think about, AI PCs. Is that there has to be a fundamentally different uh, shift in the landscape because, and I'm not going to get into like the complexity of writing code, but I'll give you an example. Is if you remember back, I don't know, 20 years ago, was it
Yeah.
25 years ago? Blu-ray versus
Mm.
HD DVD.
Yeah.
It's kind of the same thing, but fundamentally very different. And there was a battle royale for which one would take ahead, and it was Blu-ray. Not saying NPUs and GPUs are in that fight, but it is similar in the sense where this family is only going to buy a Blu-ray or an HD DVD. It's kind of the same thing. Is that a company who is writing, developing any AI product, let's say Claude Code, unless they're a big company or tons of funding, it takes time to write that to be accelerated by an NPU versus a GPU. And they have to make a choice. And Microsoft said, hey, NPU, great. And, others say GPU. So really what I would say is to make sure that you can enjoy any AI acceleration is look for a system that has an NPU, but then also get yourself a GPU because you have protected yourself from no matter what software, you're going to be able to run those AI workloads and inference, no problem. You kind of set yourself up for, the future. And no matter which way the market goes, whether it's NPU or GPU, I personally think GPU, because NVIDIA just got such a head start, you're protected or your investment's protected.
Fantastic advice, and thank you so much for sharing your insights with me today. Now it's time to have a little bit of fun with me, because as a guy speaking to me from Austin, Texas, at one of the biggest tech companies in the world, host of your own podcast, working in AI, you must have picked up a few interesting war stories in your career. So is that a funny or interesting or insightful story that you can share that you've picked up along the way?
Yeah, I mean, I've got a lot. Like, I mean, I've traveled all over. I'm not going to tell you. I've been in India, and this one I won't share. But I've found myself falling into a sewer in India. Like, I've been shaken down by customs in different countries. Like, a lot of things have happened. But I'm going to tell not a funny story. Well, it is funny, but an insightful story that I hope people will take away something from. So I was pretty young. I was probably like, let's call it late. Well, no, probably not even that old. Probably like 28-ish. So still pretty young in my career, 5 or 6 years in, like a young professional. And I was doing a social media marketing role, like a social media listening marketing role, where at the time Twitter had kind of just started, Facebook was taking off, and there were tools out there that could go out and scrape, basically social media, much like Google, and basically tell you what people were saying, right? So within Dell, I was on that team and reported to a lady who reported to, so my skip a little boss at the time. She was only a VP at the time, but ultimately became the CMO of Dell. And you can research to figure out who it is and all of that. But so I reported, which was a great experience, right? But the story is that we kind of had a readout to her, and there was a couple of different listening tools that we were looking at, and the value. And one of them that was kind of a homegrown thing versus a purchase through, a company called Radian 6 that ultimately was bought by Salesforce. But, they had ROI, they had all this kind of stuff or whatever, or like perceived. So I went in full bore, right? There wasn't a lot of ROI stuff, but I went in full bore of like why this is amazing and why it's valuable to listen to your customers and all this stuff. And I remember so vividly, and it took me such by surprise where I'm going through this. I think I'm making like the best pitch ever. And she looks at me and says, Logan, this is great, but so freaking what? And I was like, whoa, okay. And I go, so, hey, I'm trying not to use her name right now, but I was like, hey, like, what do you mean? She's like, show me the money.
Oh.
And I said, all I could think about, right, is Jerry Maguire at that time, right? And obviously, like, I'm so young and she's like so powerful, like so educated and like all this, and I feel like I'm an idiot. But afterwards, she had a really great conversation with me and said, listen, like, I understand what you're trying to do, but in the corporate world, it's all about dollars and cents. And if you cannot connect your activities to some sort of revenue generating activity or some sort of return, Logan, your ideas and thoughts might be well thought of, but they will not be the ones that ever get implemented. And from that point on, it was just such an impactful lesson for me that everything I do or everything I like projects I run or programs I work on with NVIDIA or Dell, or any initiative that I have, I always look for that angle and be able to quantify out, like, not just for my time, but is it worth the company's time? Is there a return of this? What's the potential impact? And I've always done that. And I think it served me pretty well. And I always tell that story just because I want people to want to hear it because it's kind of funny, but also is that you can always kind of level yourself up at work by being able to show kind of an ROI or return story. And it will help you get much farther in your career. I can promise you that.
What a fantastic story. Absolutely love that. And finally, before I let you go, I think one thing that unites you, every single person listening here is that there's a real pressure on us all to be in a state of continuous learning. So I've got to ask, where or how do you self-educate, or what keeps your curiosity alive, helps you stay open-minded? Because it's more important than ever, and keeping up to speed with change is incredibly hard. But you're right at the heart of this space. People are looking at you to lead the way. So how do you self-educate and keep?
Great question. So you always so there's a newsletter. Well, actually, there's a couple, but I just subscribe to TLDR's AI newsletter and the Neurons, and you can Google them, you'll find them. I subscribe to those newsletters, and I literally block my calendar the first about 15 minutes of the day just to read them. And that's the thing, is you have to prioritize this learning time, because without you prioritizing, if everything's a priority, nothing's a priority, right? And this is a priority for me. So I mark it, I do it religiously. So that's one, kind of going out and being able to search the sources. But here's the thing that I think most people miss about education is never be afraid not to know the answer. Be afraid of what happens when you don't go try to find the answer. So like there'll be meetings where I'm in with some developers or customers and they'll say something like that I don't know the answer to. Well, I try to fake it till I make it the best I can in the meeting, but afterwards I've written it down and I'll go Google it, and then I'll second level Google it, and I'll third level Google it, where I try to learn everything about it, just to educate myself, because it just kind of brings up the credibility. So if you're trying to stay in the space with AI, definitely, you could always listen to Reshaping Workflows, but I won't plug that. Let's do those two newsletters. And when you hear something, take 10 seconds, use your smartphone. It's connected to the world's collective knowledge. Google it, understand it. And if you do that and make that a habit, you'll become a much more well-educated person.
Absolutely love that. Fantastic. I was speaking to someone a few weeks ago and they did something very similar. But on top of that, when they're on a 3-hour car journey, they would just have a conversation with OpenAI, just asking the questions.
Thing.
Yeah.
Same thing. Yep, exactly.
And I will add links to the Reshaping Workflows podcast, those newsletters. But for anyone wanting to find out more about everything we talked about, from GPUs, NPUs, Dell Precision and ProMax systems, anywhere you'd like to point everyone listening?
We'll put the link, but yeah, if you just click on the link below and listen to Reshaping Workflows, check it out. I appreciate it. And I love connecting on LinkedIn. I try to pride myself on answering every message that I get, unless you're like a complete spammer. But I will respond. Pretty simple. I'm the only Logan Lawler on LinkedIn. And yeah, just message me on LinkedIn. Let's connect. Let's talk. And love conversations about AI. If you ever see me, come up, introduce yourself. And yeah, love to have a conversation with you.
Awesome. Well, I'll have links to everything that you mentioned there. I'm also going to add you to my cool guys I want to have a whiskey at a bar with in Austin. So you're my Austin guy now. So next time I'm in town, we will make something happen. But more than anything, just thank you for joining me today.
Of course. Well, I really appreciate the time, Neil. Thanks for having me on. And yeah, I'll see you in Austin.
If there's one thing this conversation made clear today, it's that understanding how AI workloads actually run matters far more than chasing labels, trends, or high specs. So from local GPUs to hybrid workflows and the growing role of critical thinking in an AI-heavy world, my guest, Logan, today, he offered such a refreshingly practical view of where this space is heading. But I'd love to hear what stood out for you and your thoughts on AI hardware, whether it's on a personal basis or inside your organization. And what are the questions that you are still wrestling with after listening? So I urge you to go and check out all of the links that Logan mentioned there, including his podcast. It's brilliant. With so many builders and practitioners on now, I think you'll get so many big takeaways from those episodes. So please listen to that as well. If you want to contact me, just techtalksnetwork.com. Send me an audio message, written message, connect with me on socials, work with me, browse through 4,000 interviews, whatever it is, go over there and check it out. But that's it for today. So thank you to Logan for joining me today. A big, massive thank you to each and every one of you for not only listening, but listening right to the end. So thank you so much. But that's it for today. Speak with you tomorrow. Bye for now.